Owning a boat comes with a number of perks, like being able to say ahoy or land ho and not feel weird about it. So here's another perk. Geico's boat insurance offers access to the largest towing fleet on the water. And with specialist support from agents that are as passionate about boating as you are, there's so much value that you'll want to say, shiver me timbers, and not feel weird about that either. Get more with Geico.
With so many options, why choose Arizona State University?
For me, the only online option was ASU because of the quality. Their faculty was really involved with their students and care about your personal journey. The dedication to my personal development from my professors, that's been extremely valuable to me.
Earn your degree from the nation's most innovative university. Online. That's a degree better. Explore more than 300 undergraduate, graduate, and certificate programs at asuonline.asu.edu.
This is Wheelbearings. I'm Dan Roth.
And from Santa Clara, California, this is Sam Abu Al-Samid.
I'm really sorry you had to travel to California in March.
Well, actually, it's not really much better weather here than it was back in Michigan. I mean, it's been in the 50s in Michigan through most of February anyway. So,
yeah. I mean, that's the one little bit of solace I'll take from it is that the weather for the rest of the globe has seemed rather temperate. But we'll get to that. That's actually part of what we intend to talk about in some way.
Yeah,
kind of. This evening. But let's start with what we're driving. And other than the airplane you flew out there, not you personally, but you flew in out there. I'm assuming that was something like an A320.
No, 757. Delta runs 757s between Detroit and most of the West Coast cities to LA and San Francisco.
Huh. Alrighty then. Most of what we get out of Boston is Airbus, JetBlue.
Well, they're not actually any roomier for the most part because all of the Boeing single aisle jets are all based around the same fuselage diameter, so they're all basically the same. They're all the same width, and you have the same level of discomfort back in steerage class. Same
sausage, different lengths, right?
Pretty much, yeah. Different size engines, but so they have different ranges, but from the economy passenger seat, there's no real difference.
All right. Well, let's talk about cars instead then. Okay. You've had a Kia Optima hybrid.
Yeah. I like the Optima a lot. It's a really nice car, and I've previously driven the plug-in hybrid version, and maybe I drove the plug-in hybrid Sonata. That's it. Yeah, I had the plug-in hybrid Sonata.
I mean, kind of the same thing.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's the same powertrain. The only difference between the plug-in hybrid and the regular hybrid for the Sonata and the Optima is the battery size, and the fact that you get a plug. So the plug-in hybrid versions have it's about a 9.4 kilowatt hour battery, gives you about 27 miles of electric range. This one, is the typical 1.4 kilowatt hour battery. So you still get most of your trunk space, and there's no plug, but it'll easily do mid to upper 30s fuel economy in combined driving. And I never actually got a chance to drive the first generation Sonata and Optima hybrid, which ran from 2011 through 2015, I think. I know that there were some complaints about that version. It wasn't as smooth as some of the other hybrids, from what I'm told.
I mean, that was my impression of it. Was it just wasn't as it didn't feel quite as finished, I guess. But the new ones, on the other hand,
much better. Yeah,
they're very good.
Yeah, so they've got more powerful electric motors, and Hyundai and Kia have an interesting plug-in hybrid or an interesting hybrid powertrain architecture. So, with the Toyotas and the Fords, what they have is a system that has two motors integrated into a transmission unit with a planetary gear set, and one of the motors is tied to the planetary gear set, and by controlling that motor generator, it provides if you know how a planetary gear set works, you've got the three elements: the ring gear, the planet gears, and the sun gear, which is the one in the middle. And you have to lock one of those elements in order to move anywhere. And depending on which one you lock, it changes the effective ratio, and also can give you reverse gear. So what those systems do is they use one of the motor generators to give you essentially a variable ground or a variable lock, and it creates what's an electronic continuously variable transmission. So they use that for blending the electric drive and the torque from the engine. Hyundai and Kia have a different setup, which is more similar to what you find on most of the European hybrids, where you've got an electric motor that is sandwiched between the end of the crankshaft and the input of the transmission of a conventional 6-speed automatic transmission, basically where the torque converter would normally go. And then there's a clutch on either side of that, just between the clutches there's only one clutch between the engine and the motor that lets you disengage the engine and drive on electricity alone. And then one thing that's interesting as well that they do a little differently from most of the others. Most hybrids use the electric drive motor to actually do the start-stop functionality, and Hyundai and Kia use a belted starter generator to start and stop the engine so that it runs separately, and can. What that'll allow you to do is actually launch with electric drive and get going with the engine turned off, and then they separately launch the engine using the belted starter generator, and then engage while the clutch is disengaged. And then they engage the clutch, and it's actually working really smoothly now to give you really seamless performance. So you don't get any of the jerking that you used to get on older hybrids.
Yeah, and I find that more conventional transmission in the Hyundai Kia cars is much more pleasing to drive. It just feels better from behind the wheel. It's just a more positive feeling powertrain, and I think part of it is because it doesn't use a CVT as a torque split device. They have a more straight up feeling setup, and it was a big shift from the first ones that were a little bit disappointing. Like, yeah, it's a hybrid, but it was kind of like the Altima hybrid. Like, it's a hybrid, so you can have a hybrid badge, but it's not really anything as good as the market leaders. Now, on the other hand, I feel like it's a different flavor, but it's certainly competitive with stuff like the Camry hybrid or the Fusion hybrid. Yeah,
absolutely. I would class it as just as good. Perhaps not quite. Actually, I think it's just about as efficient now as the Camry. It used to be a few miles per gallon less, but it's really good. I like it a lot. And then combine that with the Optima, which in itself is a really good midsize car. I think it's one of the best looking cars in the segment. But I'm quite partial to the current Kia design language, and so I mean it works for me. It's very roomy inside, as is the Sonata, which it shares its platform with. So there's a lot to like about this car.
Yeah, they've certainly come quite a long way, even in just let's say 5 years with their hybrid stuff, and in say 15 with their entire car brand. Yeah, that's. It's almost,
I remember, in the mid 90s when Kia first arrived in the U.S. market as a standalone brand, because, they first came to America in the late 80s through Ford. They supplied the Ford Festiva, which was a Mazda. Wasn't that like a Mazda 121 or something? It was based on the Mazda 121, but not built quite as well as a Mazda. And then when that one ran its course, they replaced it with the Ford Aspire, which was the next generation Mazda 121,
which we called the Xpire.
Yeah, or the car for people who someday aspire to own a real car.
Yes, there's that.
let's just say that the Kias of that era were not cars to aspire to. But
that's they learned volume manufacturing.
Yeah.
I don't know if we'll get a little off track here, but I don't know if they were building from knockdowns or if they were, putting up whole production lines. They
were doing full production lines, so they essentially had the design licensed from Mazda, and Ford was an investor. I can't remember exactly how much of a stake they owned in Kia in those days, but they went to Kia, and at that time, they needed some cheap high mileage cars in order to meet their CAFE requirements. And, Kia was able to provide them with that.
Sort of goes against the idea that America's manufacturing sector was getting its lunch eaten by foreign automakers just because they wanted to infiltrate this market. Seems like there was one hand washing the other, saying like, we'll give you some money. We'll teach you how to do this. You give us some cars. Yeah, we can't profitably build
pretty
here.
Much.
Sounds like a global economy.
In those days, the Korean market was very different than it is today. Korean automakers or auto workers were not getting paid nearly what they got today. The quality of the vehicles was not nearly as good. The Korean auto industry, in those days was still relatively young, as a standalone industry. And they had a lot to learn about being competitive in the global marketplace. And, certainly, by the late 90s, Kia had gone through bankruptcy, and Hyundai had acquired a controlling stake in the company. Daewoo, had gone bankrupt, and GM essentially took them over. And, even Hyundai barely survived, and they went through a lot of quality issues here in the US. But they learned from that, and they got a lot better. And, they are, easily fully competitive today in the segments they compete in. The one area where, Hyundai, I think, is struggling a little bit right now is just in not necessarily being in the segments that they need to be in, as far as where the market is going, in some of the crossover, some of the small crossover SUVs, they need to get some additional product there to be competitive. But, as far as the products they're making are all really good, good value, good quality, and good performance.
I mean, it's been breathtaking to watch if you actually just sit back and look at how quickly it's happened. And it's funny because it's almost like a textbook example of some Marxist theory, to get really geeky for a moment, where, each developed nation, you develop your industries, and, the workers can only buy so much. And so that you're left with that surplus, and the surplus has to go somewhere. So you find another nation to purchase your surplus. But in doing that, you wind up developing their economy. And then, they wind up with a surplus. And so like that's exactly what's going on. Like Korea has certainly developed their economy over the last 20 years to the point where they're very competitive now, and they're starting to becoming on par with longer established manufacturing powerhouses. So it's interesting to watch and just think about and scratch our heads. And we are not the Econobearings podcast, so I can't say I fully understand it, but it's again just a point of interest, I suppose.
So what about you? What do you got?
I have been driving the Fiat 500X Lounge all-wheel drive. And I like it quite a bit.
I find that to be a particularly amusing. I find that to be such an amusing trim level name for that vehicle, because it's a small crossover, and to call that a lounge, just seems bizarre.
Yeah, well, I think that fits in with Fiat's, I don't know, their botched brand launch here, but they tried to have sort of pop and lounge and just these fun brand names, almost a little mini-esque in that sense. Lounge is it's a trim level, I suppose, or like a package. I went to the website the other day and was playing around with the configurator, and it was a little weird, add lounge to it and you get all this stuff. And that's really, it's kind of what it is. It's like a customer preferred package that is kind of expensive. But I like it because it's a $33,000 500X. Mm-hmm. So, I should like it at that point. It's filled up to the brim with options and luxury features. But at its core, the 500X is a lot more charming than its most direct competitor, the Mini Countryman. And I think that's probably just because it's a bit more honest. It's still got a bit of design flair for sure, but it's more confident, I guess, in its personality if we're going to start anthropomorphizing cars. The Mini seems to always be a little bit more showy, a little more self-aware, like needs sort of constantly to be shouting like, look, I'm a Mini, I do these Mini things. Where the 500X definitely has some personality to its design, but at its core, the form doesn't get in the way of the function as much, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And certainly with the 500X, like at $33,000, not a great deal. You're in pretty heavy crossover territory there. It certainly has a style all its own, but at 33 large, you can buy a lot more functionality. So you can get into the 500X for a lot less, and it's mostly as good.
It started at 20 grand for the front wheel drive pop.
Yeah, and I think that the all wheel drive is not necessary here either. It's
at least not this winter.
No, and I don't think it's basically a front wheel drive car, and that'll be fine in the winter if you put winter tires on it. Again, I'm just going to keep banging on that. But I didn't feel that it necessarily needed all-wheel drive at all. And I think actually the all-wheel drive system just adds a little bit of weight and a little bit of complexity. And I got this weird resonance from I presume it was the all-wheel drive system. It just started around 30 miles an hour, and it's just sort of sounds like it almost sounds like it hasn't shifted up yet, and you look at the tach and you're like, nope, we are not running the engine that fast. What is that hum? And
that's odd because when I drove one last summer, I did not notice that.
Okay. So maybe that's just the one that I had.
It could be.
That happens sometimes with press vehicles. They get abused.
You don't say.
So maybe it's not its fault, but it was just something I noticed. The biggest cost to this one is the lounge package. It's $5,300, and the leather is nice. It looks good with the dark blue exterior that I think is part of the lounge trim. But I wouldn't ever pay money for the extra stuff it's bundled with. It has the lane sense system and the lane departure and collision warning. And I know that our feedback from our poll said that we complain about tech a lot, and that's probably me complaining about tech a lot. But we only complain about tech that doesn't work as well as it should. Well, I mean, the tech works. That's not, it's aggressive and it's annoying. And this is not a big car. It's not hard to drive. And so the systems are really touchy. And, on some of the roads here, I go through the rotary in Concord, Massachusetts twice a day. And every now and then you get close to the lane markings and it's nudging the wheel and stuff. And it took me a while.
For those of you that don't live in Massachusetts, that's what's known as a roundabout in other parts of the world.
Or a traffic circle.
Yeah.
But yeah, but I think part of that is me, some people will actually pay extra for that because they want it. And I understand that. But I found it to be a pretty aggressive system, not aggressive to the point of startling. It's quick to act and it does its thing. It's just not the kind of stuff I want to pay money for. And I understand it's designed to help, and it does meet that objective. So let me ask, have you driven the Jeep Renegade? Yes, I don't like the Renegade.
The Renegade, if you want a small SUV that can have some real off-road chops, the Renegade is probably the best option there. But I agree. I actually liked the 500X much more than the Renegade. And, they share a platform, and the 500 is not going to have the kind of, absolute off-road capability that you're going to get with the Jeep, at least with the Trailhawk version of the Renegade. But, I actually found the Fiat a lot more pleasant to drive. And I also like the way it looks better too, both inside and outside.
I completely agree with both of those. And, nobody's taking the Jeep off road either,
that's true.
Just
almost
not
no
that
one.
kind of car.
Yeah.
So that's sort of all right, I guess I can do it. But with the 500X with all-wheel drive is going to be more capable than most people are ever going to need. Anyway, the Jeep to me just seems, again, it's like overly cloying. It draws too much attention to itself, and it just doesn't work as well for me. The 500X is just a nice balanced package, and it rides well. It's not too harsh. It's not too floaty. It handles pretty well. Weight transfer is well managed. So it's actually, pretty fun to drive. This one had the 2.4 liter engine in it, so it was not the most efficient. If you want that, you go with the front wheel drive with the turbo and the stick. But the 9-speed auto is okay here. There's not a problem, pulling the steep overdrive with this engine on the highway. So I did actually manage to get about 70 miles an hour. It'll drop into 9th gear, especially if you do it manually. And this time around, the transmission didn't do. It shifted very smoothly. Sometimes in the past, I've gotten this transmission in a variety of different FCA vehicles, and there's been some weird shifting behavior. So I'm sure that there's been lots of software revisions. I've tried this transmission since. Yeah,
they come pretty regularly for that 9-speed. Yeah,
and so they're figuring it out. But yeah, it's a good car. And if you want some personality in your car, just go with the front wheel drive one, and you don't really need to spring for the leather. Again, it's nice, but it's not really all that. I don't know. I don't think it's all that necessary.
Yeah, the one I drove, I just looked up the review, was the Trekking with all-wheel drive, and it came to just shy of $29,000 with delivery. And I thought it had everything that it really needed. And like I said, I like the looks of it. I think it's a cute little vehicle. And as I described it, I thought it was the best of the lot in the 500 family.
Well, do you still feel that way now that the Compass is based on it too?
Well, I haven't driven the Compass yet, so I couldn't tell you. But I mean, I'm just of the different 500 variants. The regular 500, the 500L, and the 500X. I would take a 500X over either of the other two.
Oh, isn't the 500L terrible? It's so
Let's
awful.
not even go there.
It's like a refrigerator.
I don't even know what they were thinking with that design, but yeah. I mean, this one, they I think they really got the design right.
Yeah, it has a bit of a rake to its profile. It looks good without being overly cloying or anything. It's well done.
Yeah.
And it's a decent platform. Although, there's certainly, I did notice that going in and out of the driveway, I could hear the door seals.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So, and sometimes I can, sometimes I can't. Not most cars they'll flex a bit. Just the way you get them wound up with a very slow sort of thing, and you can drive it up an apron with one corner, and you can twist up the chassis a bit on any car. Mm-hmm. But this one, I seem to notice a little bit of stuff shifting. But again, it's probably not the car's endemic with the car. This is a vehicle that's been in the press fleet. It's probably been hammered upon.
Somebody probably actually did try to take it off road.
Yeah, what's weird is I've had a run of FCA vehicles in pretty quick succession. Like even this week, they swapped out the 500X for the Challenger GT because the last time I drove it, it was just at the launch event. So now I've got it for a week loan. I really like a lot of what FCA has.
Yeah,
which I don't know.
I've enjoyed driving the vehicles. Based on some of the various quality survey results, I'm not so sure I'd actually enjoy owning one.
I hear that, but our Grand Cherokee's been pretty solid. It's got a couple of recalls, but it hasn't had any bad behavior from any of those. It's on the list.
But I mean, which car in recent years hasn't had a few recalls?
Yeah, I don't know. They all seem
at least for
pretty
Takata
good to
airbags, if nothing else.
Yeah. Well, that or some kind of weird electrical thing, because apparently they can't figure out how to keep water out of electrical stuff. But every FCA vehicle I've had lately, it drives well. Like it drives like it was tuned by people who understand how all the pieces work together. I don't know. They have a group of people doing good stuff over there, even if the cars are pretty old. Like the Challenger is ancient, but it's a nice ride.
Yeah,
The 500X is not the newest thing. Especially now as Mini keeps introducing new stuff. But it's decent. So while I look over there and go, well, they've taken all kinds of stuff away from most of the car lines, and most of and sales numbers came out today too, and it's just. I don't know. Not everybody's doing all that well. I won't say that they're not doing all that well, but numbers are down actually this month. Kind of for all automakers. And you look at Chrysler, and it's like, well, each of their brands has like one product that carries most of the rest of the brand, except for Jeep. Jeep has a couple, but
yeah, I mean, Jeep's got Wrangler and Cherokee and Grand Cherokee.
Yeah. So I'm interested to see what's going to happen with the new Compass, because the Compass is stepping right on the toes of the Cherokee. It's such an upgrade. It looks fantastic in pictures. I'm sure in person,
I've seen it at a couple of auto shows now, and it's a good looking vehicle.
Yeah, and it's about the right size. It's about the right price. Now they've got some vehicles like right on top of each other. Certainly the Renegade is still there for the people who want that tiny thing, but you go Compass, Cherokee, Grand Cherokee. They're all within a pretty close distance of each other. So
yeah,
we'll see how that plays out.
They'll have a new Wrangler coming not too far down the road as well.
Yeah. The world is on the edge of its seat for that. And in the meantime, we should do some stories. So you are out in California because you're talking to autonomous vehicle folks, but just recently you posted a piece on the Navigant blog as well about Ford investing in Argo.
Right. So yeah, I'm out here to speak tomorrow at the Autonomous Vehicle Silicon Valley Summit in Santa Clara, and I've had the chance to sit down with a few different people over the last couple of days and get some thoughts. And on the way back from the Chicago Auto Show a couple of weeks ago, news came out while I was on the train that Ford was, quote unquote, investing $1 billion in this startup called Argo AI, which is after, I got on the call that they did with CEO Mark Fields and CTO Raj Nair, where they described what they were doing. And it's they aren't actually paying out $1 billion up front, for this company that's only existed for about 4 months prior to the deal.
Yeah, that's probably smart.
Yeah. Effectively what Ford is actually doing with this is they're doing kind of a corporate restructuring of part of their engineering team. Because one of the issues that Ford and every other traditional automaker has had is trying to recruit, especially software engineers. All the software engineers want to go to Silicon Valley and work for some startup, where they're getting some stock options, and, chances are the startup is going to go belly up before it ever gains any success. But, every once in a while, just like with the venture capitalists that are putting all the money into these startups, one of them becomes a hit, and, because they, the way they usually work is they underpay their engineers in cash up front, but they give them a bunch of stock options. And then if they find somebody to buy them out, or they get a big IPO, then these guys all get rich on their stock options. Ford and other traditional companies can't really do that, because, their stocks have been going nowhere for years. So, paying somebody stock options is just, is not going to be a viable option to try to recruit people. And they can't really, go and throw huge bundles of cash at these guys either, because, they've got, tons of other employees that, say, hey, what about me? Why am I?
Where's my bundle of cash?
Exactly. Yeah. So what they've done is this company, Argo AI, that was started by a couple of guys. One came from Google, and where did the other guy come from? I can't remember now.
Come from Waymo? Well, Google is Waymo. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
There was another who was working with Uber.
So Yeah. So one guy from Uber, one guy from Waymo, and they left and they started Argo AI. And so what Ford is doing is they're committing to $1 billion over 5 years, and they're probably going to pay out a couple $100 million effectively up front, and then based on their performance over the next few years, they'll keep putting more money in, and for that. Ford is going to get a majority stake in Argo AI. They won't own it outright, but they will get a majority stake in it. The founders, obviously get an equity share, and then they're setting aside a bunch of the stock in this company to give stock options to the employees. And since this company has only existed for a few months, the question was asked, why? What have these guys got, since they, just got started, that is so important that, you need it for your autonomous system, which seems to already be working pretty well.
Yeah. I mean, that was my question too, is like Ford's been working on this. They've got a car that's supposed to be in production in like 4 years. And so this is almost like a vote of no confidence in their internal team.
Except for the fact that what they're doing is they're essentially transferring all of their internal team over to Argo AI, where they will continue doing the work that they're doing. And, in addition to their salaries, they'll get some stock options in Argo AI. And
good for them.
And they also will have, the Argo AI, because they have the ability to pay stock options, will hopefully have a better chance of recruiting, some of these engineers from Stanford and Carnegie Mellon and other places that would have otherwise be going to other Silicon Valley startups, and bring those guys in to help the effort. So they're it's not so much that Argo has any particular technology that's of any value, but it's just a corporate restructuring mechanism that will hopefully help Ford to recruit some more engineers that they need to finish this project.
Well, that has been an issue too. I mean, first of all, you've got the talent that they're highly sought after, and they're kind of playing the lottery, right? With the whole idea of like, well, okay, fine, I'll take a little bit smaller salary, but this looks really promising, and I'm going to get a huge pile of stock options, and they've got venture capital. So at a certain point, they're going to float an IPO. I mean, look what Snap's doing today. At that
a company
point,
that has no profits and is going to be valued at $24 billion tomorrow.
Yeah, which is, and it's the same as Uber. Like it's just a stupid amount of valuation for a company that does nothing. But they have a platform, and the platform is, great. Fine, whatever. They can say that they can monetize advertising and whatever. This is actually developing a real product, and they're not in the Valley, so I feel like that's probably part of an issue. They're in Pittsburgh, so yeah. I mean.
Although, most of the engineering team, the engineering team that's shifting over from Ford engineering to Argo AI are going to stay in Dearborn.
Well, and the thing that I noticed about it too was that Ford is really good at being Ford. They're really good at the car stuff. What we've seen from some of these other companies that are trying to get into developing autonomous vehicles is that they're good at the autonomous stuff. They're not good at the car stuff, and they've realized that. I mean, that's why they're partnering now with a bunch of manufacturers. But even with Google developing their own cars, it was like, well, they got a steep learning curve there,
right? Which kind of gets us into. You want to jump into the next story, John McElroy's column?
Yeah, I mean, it was an interesting thought starter, and I think in the short term he's correct, but I think in the long term it's anybody's guess. And I was wondering what your thoughts on it were. I guess so. The premise is that the headline of the article was the race for autonomous cars is over and Silicon Valley lost. Because basically you had the companies that can go out there and say like, yeah, we can out innovate the automakers. Sure, that's fine, but the automakers can out automaker you. Which is really key when you're trying to develop cars. And so they've gotten on the ball, and they've realized that, if you're going to put this technology in a car, you're going to wind up basically as a supplier. and automakers squeeze their suppliers and they develop their products with suppliers. And it's been a learning curve for companies like Google and Apple to figure out how it actually works when they're building an automobile. But I'm not sure that the full on story is out. Maybe in the short term, GM releasing their continuing to refine and release, stuff like the Bolt and then their autonomous tech and everything. Yeah, they're going to do good in the short term. I think that the Detroit automakers are going to have a real good run with it. But in the long term, I feel like it's going to balance out.
Yeah. Well, first thing I would say is, the headline on John's column, that the race is over. The race is far from over.
I think that was on purpose. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the race, the race is actually just barely beginning. But that said, I do agree that at this point in time, the traditional auto industry is actually ahead in many respects, and I think that they will likely end up winning to a degree. I don't think they're going to stomp all over the tech industry. I think of the Silicon Valley companies, I think the one that's in the best shape and is best positioned for some success is Waymo. Because they're doing a lot of the right things. As John says in the story, or in his column, they're not. They have backed away from building their own cars. And I don't know how serious they ever really were about actually getting into the full on car manufacturing business. They have refocused their efforts on the autonomous driving stack, so the whole thing, the software, the processing, the sensing, all of that piece of it. And then also the services around that. And I think that part is the key to what's going to be, that's going to be the key to success in the autonomous race, is the companies that can both build the hardware and the software, the autonomous driving system, but also do the vertical integration to provide the mobility services. Because, I think a lot of these vehicles for the foreseeable future are going to be very expensive, but more importantly, there's a lot of things that still aren't resolved around the legal liabilities for the performance of these systems. If there's any issues, if they, and they will get into crashes from time to time. They'll probably crash a lot less than human drivers, but they will have problems, and somebody is going to have to be liable for the mistakes that these systems make. And also in order to maintain these, to keep these vehicles running properly, they need to be maintained with the right parts. They need to be serviced properly. And they need to be kept up to date. And when you sell vehicles to consumers, you cannot guarantee that. I mean, anybody that's, seen car makers try to do recalls, try to get people to bring their cars in to get them fixed for recalls, knows how hard it is to get consumers to get their vehicles serviced, even when they don't have to pay for it. So car makers are, everybody that's in the autonomous space is going to want to retain control of most of these vehicles internally. And the way they can do, the one way they can do that, make sure that they are maintained properly, is to own them and provide, be vertically integrated to provide the services. And I think the only part that Waymo, at least for the time being, is staying away from is actually making the vehicle platform. They're going to partner with somebody to provide vehicle platforms that they will put their systems into, and then provide mobility services that run the gamut, from small 1 or 2 person pod cars up through larger vehicles and maybe even commercial vehicles for cargo.
I'm kind of surprised that Waymo just didn't buy Mitsubishi. They could have just gotten the whole thing. Maybe that wasn't the right product for them.
Yeah, I think that's probably the right answer there.
But I see another issue with this stuff that, like, so there's some things that just haven't been solved yet. How they're going to share the road, like we talked about, who's going to be liable, but also like data and privacy. Like we've seen, Uber employees talking about how they've used the data that the platform collects to sort of snoop on people. On the flip side of that, and John notes this too, is that Chevrolet collected over 4,000 terabytes of data from customers' cars. That's your trips. That's where you're going when you're going.
That's going to be a huge business going forward. Is data services. I mean, as part of my job as an analyst with Navigant, last year we published a report that I wrote on data services for automotive applications that was all about what John talks about here. Which is, with all this data that's generated by cars, and increasingly, cars are going to have standard telematics systems that can transmit all kinds of telemetry data back to the manufacturers. There's an opportunity there to make money off of that data. Or to use that data in a variety of ways. I mean, one way that they definitely do it is for product development. So they gather information about how the vehicles are used, where they're used, and that gets fed into their product development process for generating future iterations of the cars. So one example of that, is with the Chevy Volt. When the second generation Volt came out a couple of years ago, there were a lot of questions about why did GM not put in support for DC fast charging on the thing. Well, their answer was that, they looked at the data from the first generation Volt and they realized that, more than 3/4 of Volt buyers didn't even bother getting a level 2, 240 volt charger. They just used a 110 volt charger because, with the size of the battery in there, they could charge it overnight.
Yep.
And because it was a plug-in hybrid, they could drive it around as well. So they didn't need the 240 volt charging. So, they said, well, why should we put that extra complexity and cost into the vehicle when people aren't going to use it anyway? And so
that's a perfect argument.
Yeah, that's the kind of argument that they could back up based on the telemetry data that they had from the vehicles, from the way customers use the vehicles. So there's all kinds of things like that. And they're starting to do predictive diagnostics. Where based on data that's collected from millions of vehicles, they can see patterns that are precursors to various types of component or system failures. And so now, they can monitor the telemetry data from vehicles and predict when something is going to fail before it does, and then provide an alert to the driver and say, hey, we see patterns of performance in the vehicle that indicate, for example, that your battery is going to need to be replaced in the next month or two. Would you like us to schedule a service appointment for you so you can get your battery replaced? And
I can just imagine the usefulness of that kind of thing to an advertiser as well. Oh,
absolutely.
By the way,
and you send the person to their local dealer, and right. Then the GM gets an affiliate fee or a lead generation fee when that customer goes into the dealer for that service.
I mean, it's creepy as hell, and it makes me glad that I have a dumb car.
Yeah.
On the other hand,
but look at it from the perspective of, would you rather get an alert a couple of weeks before your battery dies and needs to be replaced, and go in and fix it and get it repaired, or would you rather be stranded on the side of the road?
So, are we talking Dan the anachronism, or Dan putting himself in the shoes of the normal person?
Let's go with the latter, the normal person.
Yes, I would.
I know what Dan the anachronism would say.
Well, yeah, I'll get to that. But the average person isn't paying enough attention to the car. They probably wouldn't mind getting a note, and you know what? Hey, give them a 10% discount on a battery.
Yeah, those are the kinds of things they can do. And then GM gets a cut of the the transaction, same kind of thing. Ford last year introduced Ford Pass, and they're going to be providing all kinds of services through that. One of the things they're doing is parking. So they're working with parking providers so that people using Ford Pass, when they need to find a parking space, they can, as more parking providers keep track of, where spaces are available, and doing partnerships with Ford. You can use the Ford Pass app that's built into Sync, to find where there's a parking lot or a garage with an available parking space, reserve that parking space, and pay for it, before you even get there, through the car. And then, they're not doing it yet, but, eventually, Ford will get a cut of that. Or, usage-based insurance. Currently, you go to your insurance company, most insurance companies now will give you a little OBD2 dongle that you plug into your car to get a discount on your insurance if you're a good driver. Well, if you've got the telematics data, you don't need to plug in that dongle. The insurance companies can just get that information directly from the manufacturers.
Yeah, I mean, I'm surprised that. So I guess at this point, the insurance thing is you have to opt in, but I feel like at a certain point, there's going to be a clause in your insurance that just says, given your car's year, make, model, you have to opt out, or we're going to go to the manufacturer, we're going to pay them the fee, and we're going to get.
And that's one of the things when
onboard OBD information,
when I did the research for this report, I talked to most of the manufacturers, and all of them, and through the Alliance of Automobile Manufacturers and the Global Association of Global Automakers, they've got a policy, they've got privacy policies set up for vehicle data. And one of the things that pretty much all the manufacturers said was that the vehicle owner owns the data that's generated by the car. The car makers consider themselves stewards of that data. And, as part of your agreement. That's
weird because they consider the software in the car or that runs completely counter to right to repair.
Well, that's a different story. So, the data that's generated by the car is different from, the software that's running on the car. So they want to control the software that's running on the car, but the data that's generated about your usage of the car, you own that data. And before they can share it with third parties, you have to opt in. Now, consider, go back to what I was saying earlier about mobility services operated by manufacturers that own these autonomous vehicles. Once we shift over to that environment of mobility services where you don't own a car anymore, you just, pay for a subscription or pay per ride or per mile or however the pricing models get worked out. Now the manufacturers own that data. And so they can do whatever they want with it, because they are the vehicle owners.
I mean, I can see the upside for it. Even with if they're selling that to something like an insurance company, well, the insurance company can, if they're not getting personally, almost like HIPAA, if they're not getting personally identifiable data, it'll help them at least adjust their risk pool, saying everybody with the Camaro that's red, that's this trim level, we think they're this kind of risk. So in the end, the consumer may get a benefit from it, or things may actually adjust against you. It's if everybody with a red Z28 crashes it, you're going to pay more for insurance. But
and to a degree, I mean that's always been the case. I mean, you've always paid different premiums based on what kind of car you drive. If you buy, a V6 Mustang versus a V8 Mustang, you're going to pay more for a V8 Mustang than you will for the V6. Or if you drive a Camaro, with a manual transmission versus an automatic, you might pay more. So, I mean, it's part of the premium has always been based on the type of car you drive, as well as your own personal demographics and your own personal history. And it's just now, they have even more granularity because they can start to get data specifically about what you do versus what the group that you fall into, based on your demographics and the type of vehicle you own, would say to them. So if you've got someone who is a very careful driver of a Mustang GT, or a Camaro SS, they might get lower premiums than somebody, who is, drag racing from stoplight to stoplight in the same car.
It'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to see. I mean, I would like to see stuff get more integrated through the screens that are in every car. If we can start to streamline all of those different services and where you can update and pay for things, even if they could build in like, a transponder to each car for the tolls. So you don't have to put something on the windshield, and you can just link it up with your account through the screen and
that's
payments and stuff like that.
That's something you'll be able to do, with telematics, or even potentially with V2V systems, vehicle to vehicle communications, or V2X, vehicle to external communications. That effectively becomes a transponder.
Yeah, so it's coming. It'll be better. As much as I complain about it.
There's tens or hundreds of billions of dollars in potential revenue for the manufacturers, and not just for the manufacturers, but for whoever is providing the telematics services. So you can have aftermarket services as well for cars that don't have it built in. Companies like Verizon and AT&T, and T-Mobile are offering aftermarket telematics systems that you can plug into your car. And, all of those can collect data that they can generate additional revenues off of. But particularly for the car makers, they're looking out, and seeing a world, where if everybody, especially in cities, if the majority of people are riding around in autonomous cars that they don't drive, it's likely that we're going to see a decline in total vehicle sales, starting, by the late 2020s. And at that point, they need to get revenues somewhere else. So they're looking for these kinds of recurring revenue streams.
Yeah, they'll figure it out. They're getting there. We want to do a palate cleanser because when you were in Chicago, you recorded an interview with Robert Davis from Mazda North America, and it sounds like it was pretty interesting. You guys talked a bunch of stuff like Diesel Sky Active and HCCI and autonomy and more. And we have one more topic that we can tee up after that. It's more of a rant than a topic. So if we want to do a palate cleanser, we can listen to that interview and then come back. Anything you wanted to say before we go to it?
No, let's just play the interview. I think you guys will find it interesting. And then at the end, we've also got one reader question that we put off listener question we put off from last week.
Nice. All right. We'll go to that and we'll come back.
All right.
Robert, it's good to see you again. Yep. So what I wanted to talk about today was fuel economy strategies going forward. Mazda obviously has been a leader in that space. In part at least, because of the nature of your product lineup. You don't do big trucks, so that helps. But they certainly over the last half dozen years or so, last 10 years. I think a big part of what's helped the company is a real focus on the fundamentals. You haven't done a lot in terms of really exotic technologies, but it's been really getting down and doing fundamental stuff, lightweighting, good structural design, lightweight, good fundamental design of engines and transmissions for thermal efficiency. Going forward, how far can that take Mazda? And what do you see as next steps for Mazda? I mean, there's been some recent reports about Mazda introducing next generation Skyactiv as an HCCI engine. I don't know how much you can talk about that, but what do you see going forward for Mazda?
Well, I mean, kind of going back to your earlier point, we saw in 2009 a real reason that we had to make a change. We had to change basically everything that we do to meet the challenge not only of the U.S. requirements, but the global requirements. And that's where Skyactiv, just kind of a backstory, Skyactiv was developed from a kind of a terminology that we talked about, the sky's the limit. And we told our engineering and advanced product development people to quit saying or quit believing things like you can't have high power and high fuel economy. You can't have very strong and very light. You know, there's conventional contradictions that just need to be broken, and you need to think differently. So what they went about doing is creating a whole new generation of cars, and that's the cars that are around here now, what we call the sixth generation of cars, that are developed differently, manufactured differently, and retailed and marketed differently. And that's where we've gotten to be, where we're the best fuel economy in the U.S. 4 years in a row, with 5 in the bag, and I would probably say 6 is going to be pretty easy to predict too. So all that was built around, before you go to electrification, before you add the gizmos and the sophisticated things, get the base done right first. So get the gasoline or diesel, manual or automatic transmission, along with the whole the development of the vehicle done right the first time. Then when you add electrification or any options to it, it'll improve it even that much more. So that's where we're at, and that's where we will then take the next step to our second generation of Skyactiv vehicles. We can't talk that much about it. We'll be talking in a lot more detail with you guys this summer about it as we approach the first kind of introductions of our seventh generation products. But basically it continues on that, because we believe strongly that the environment and CO2 and all the things, safety, environment, CO2, corporate compliance, shouldn't be a single vehicle. So it shouldn't be that Model Z over there with a hybrid. It should be all the vehicles. And if you look at our full product lineup in America, all of them are, I think I'm safe to say they're all in the top 3 in fuel economy. So it's not about having, hey, Jeremy, you've got extra income, so therefore you're allowed to buy a hybrid Camry. No, every Mazda 6 is fuel efficient. Every Mazda 6 executes at a high level and is responsible. So the next generation of technology for gasoline engines, and you asked a question, how much more do you think it's good? We think it's easily 30%.
Out of the fundamental technologies?
Yep. 30% before adding electrification. And when we look at engine, that's internal combustion, both gas and diesel. So we think there's that much opportunity left there. And this is where we've been talking to the regulators. We think, using Japan as an example, Japan in the next 5 years is going to improve their electric generation efficiency by 20%, which is awesome. Unfortunately, all that 20% efficiency is going to get taken up in the transportation sector because the government's mandating electric vehicles. Our position is, listen, tell us the end game. Give us the target. Let us apply all the technology sources that we got to reach the target, and don't put an artificial barrier in the middle that says you got to have some percentage electric. Because no engineer has told me yet that he can't get to the number for California in 2025 that he's got to have electric. I don't know what I don't know yet. In other words, so let the industry run with the technology. I mean, when Kennedy said we will send a man to the moon and back safely by the end of the decade, he didn't say, oh yeah, you had to use a kerosene lantern and black powder. Right. He let the scientists
stay technology agnostic. Set a goal that you want to get to, but don't prescribe how you get there.
Right. And that's my big challenge with California, is because I tell them, listen, we breathe the same air as you. There's not car company air here and ARB air here, and we all remember from the 70s and in the San Fernando Valley. I remember as a kid flying into the airport and seeing the red-brown air. So what you're trying to do, we're not against. Just quit messing in the middle. Let me use every piece of technology I can to get to the end game. There's other people and other things that you can go regulate. You don't need to regulate this. Okay. We can get there.
So, in terms of, you talk about 30% you think you can still get out of internal combustion engines, before you start getting into heavy electrification. Would that include things like any sort of light electrification? I mean, you already do the IE loop, but
No, we think that's the base technology. So the light electrification is everything is additive.
Okay.
And at 30% improvement, that's well-to-wheel equivalent to electric today.
Okay.
I mean, so it's hard to, you can argue the EMPG whether it's right or not, but at 70 miles per gallon on a conventional car that burns gasoline or diesel, that's pretty frickin' darn good.
So how much of that 30% would depend on utilization of diesel as opposed to gas engines?
Well, there's the studies I've seen from our engineering group shows that conventional gasoline has more opportunity to grow than diesel, but they both still have opportunity. And then what we're going to bring the diesel in the CX-5 this summer, and we still see opportunity in the U.S. I mean, we don't think the Volkswagen situation, as tragic as it is, has that much impact into the U.S. public. We think that's a little bit too much inside baseball. We see TDI owners as being very loyal to TDI and diesel buyers being very loyal to diesel. And it also improves our brand image.
Okay. Do you foresee expanding diesel availability, perhaps to the CX-9 or to other models within your lineup?
Well, I'll say not to the CX-9 because the CX-9 is too big for. We only have one diesel, 2.2 liter turbo diesel, and I can't comment on other stuff. Sorry.
Okay. As far as electrification, obviously, your preference would be, as you said, for a technology agnostic approach to meeting the standards. But right now, that's not the reality. So you are going to have to do some electrification. And do you see that, for Mazda, given the size, the volumes you have, are you going to be able to do that with plug-in hybrids, or are you going to have to do battery electrics or some combination of the two?
Well, I think the solution will be a combination, and I just don't think anybody is going to be able to do it just one way. And that always goes back to the conversations we've all had. The answer to this is not one silver bullet, and that's what really frustrates us. A lot of the government agencies think that battery electric hybrids are the silver bullet, and they're just not.
Right.
You don't wipe away 110 years worth of industry in one swell swoop and say, okay, everybody, it's now time for battery electric. And what we were just talking about is you forget the other infrastructure that's got to happen. The electricity doesn't just come out the wall, right? It's we all just think that. We've been conditioned to that. But where we live, we get notifications on our cell phone to turn off your air conditioner when it's 105 degrees because they don't have enough generating power. So I don't know that it's fully been worked through on how if the public and the OEMs made it to the 15% penetration or exceeded it by 2025, where's the power?
Right.
We were chatting with someone this morning who suggested that off-peak hours have adjusted to between 2 and 5 p.m. now in Southern California because people go home and plug their car in, charge overnight. They go to the office in the morning, plug their car in, charge
So the morning, what was previously off-peak is now just as much demand as during the day.
Well, but it's also during the day because the overnight where there wasn't much happening is now so loaded. So the people that charge at home overnight. People that charge at the office plug in at 8:30, 9 o'clock in the morning, and their cars are fully charged by 1:30 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So between the time that the daytime chargers are done charging and before the nighttime chargers start charging.
Yeah.
So now you've just got all these paradigm shifts to get around.
Wow. What about, obviously driving, as part of Mazda's philosophy, you got driving matters, people who buy Mazdas like to drive. And certainly I like to drive. But we're seeing this strong movement towards adoption of automation. You've got a lot of ADAS features in your new models, which is good. I think that's a very helpful thing. But do you foresee participating, at least in the near to midterm, in the automation ecosystem, the autonomous ecosystem?
Well, I mean, it's where you draw the line on autonomy, right? Full autonomy, with no driver input, the car with just a seat in it. I would say firmly no. That's not our deal. That's in our mind that you hit it already. The driving does matter, and that we feel the best computer in a car is the human brain. Now, that doesn't stop us from applying different technologies to keep that person in that car out of danger, either known danger or danger due to errors in judgment or distraction. So, for example, the CX-5 has radar cruise control that will now go to 0 and resume. So that's either making driving easier for you when you're stuck in bumper-to-bumper traffic, which for guys like us is incredibly infuriating, and makes it easier, or avoids the crash.
Right.
But so we're taking technology to help the driver. Our approach is still very human-centric. We're not interested in developing cars that are just the most comfortable seat, or who can build the box with the 2 best lazy boys in it. So it's just not where we want to go. And we still think there's plenty of us still left in the world.
Yeah, and I think there probably will be for some time to come.
Yeah.
But as far as supporting the business, there's some companies like Waymo, for example, that they're interested in partnering with OEMs. What they've told me is that they don't necessarily want to get into the business of building cars, but they're interested in partnering with OEMs that could provide vehicle platforms for them to integrate their systems onto and use for mobility services.
They should call Checker.
Yeah. Well, I was going to ask. My question was, is something like is a partnership like that with a company like Waymo or Uber or other companies that are involved in the mobility business, would Mazda be interested in working with companies like that, at least to provide vehicle platforms for them to use?
Well, it's tough to say, because really right now our business is managed around capacity. So to take that capacity out of the dealer network and out of the retail network and put it into that kind of fleet activity would not be very appealing. We had a shift this year for the U.S. business being down. We shifted that production from the U.S. to China because overall globally we have a capacity of 1.55 million cars, and so there's no real reason to do that. Would there ever be a reason? Would I ever say no? No. But right now it's not high on our priority list. It's just the same reason why we don't sell cars to Hertz, Budget, Avis. We sell a little bit to keep the relationship going, but much smaller percentage than the big mass market competitors. Remember, we're trying to take Mazda into a legitimate alternative to established premium, and we just don't think that selling en masse to those type of mobility providers supports that goal.
Okay. All right. Well, I think that's all the questions I had. I appreciate your time very much.
It's
great to talk with you.
I guess coming off an interview with Mazda, my biggest question is, what are your feelings about them staying independent? Do you think that they're as they develop all of this technology, because it seemed like they're kind of on a tear to be pretty aggressive about developing stuff. Are they doing that to make themselves an attractive sale?
I wouldn't say that they're trying to make themselves an attractive sale to another car maker. I think they're trying to make themselves an attractive sale to consumers. They're trying to create a unique value proposition. Create products that are going to be appealing to consumers. In their own right. I personally find their cars very appealing. I love driving Mazdas, and I think
but you're Canadian, right?
Yeah, whatever.
I'm sorry.
No, I mean,
Canadians love Mazdas.
Yeah, Mazdas are fun cars to drive.
No, they are. I really like them too,
and I love the way they look too.
If I were a car company, though, I might be worried. Like, oh boy, the enthusiasts like us, we're screwed.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the thing you'll notice, is that they're trying to shift the brand a little bit more upmarket. So that it's not like they're trying to necessarily compete with premium brands, but they're trying to find a kind of a middle ground, to have a little bit more of a premium feel, above the mainstream, Ford and Chevy and Honda and Toyota, so be just that, kind of one notch up there, which, if they can do that, if they can succeed, that can hopefully help their margins a little bit, keep them profitable and be sustainable, they sell about 1.5 million vehicles a year globally. And certainly, it's not unreasonable that you should be able to, have a profitable business with those kind of volumes. And, hopefully they can succeed in doing it.
Yeah. It's just when you're a global automaker, 1.5 million is just, that's not that much. So,
yeah. And at least for the foreseeable future, they want to focus on cars that people actually drive and not just drive, but actually enjoy driving. So they're not going hardcore sports cars, but they definitely want cars that will be a pleasure to drive. And it's interesting, the tagline you find, when you look at new Mazdas, on the license plate frames, it says it's not, they're not using the zoom anymore. It's driving matters. So.
Well, I'll agree. They make cars that are nice to drive. The new CX-9 is pretty spiffy.
They're nice to be in, really good feeling interiors, well laid out. If they would just add Android Auto, be perfect.
Sure that's probably for next year. So
yeah,
they'll have it eventually. I mean, they're going to have it at some point. All right. So the last thing I wanted to get to before we get to the listener email that we skipped last week was, I wanted to revisit my feeling that we should at least be acting as if we're having an energy crisis. A few episodes ago, I decided to put forth my crackpot theory that we should just have another energy crisis because, energy's very cheap right now, and I feel like we're not really paying attention to conserving, not necessarily just oil, but just developing a better way to do things, or alternatives anyway. Because, the truth is, even if oil, natural gas, and other fuels are inexpensive and supply is abundant at the moment, that doesn't mean we're not actually already in an energy crisis. It just may not be a constrained supply. Kind of what I'm getting at here is permafrost is disappearing, glaciers are melting. So
it's not permanent anymore?
Right, exactly. It was permanent for 10,000 years. So oh boy, yeah, it is an energy crisis. It's just not the energy crisis you may think. It's, warming is pretty clearly going on, at least, over the last however many years. We've got the data to back it up. We're recording the warmest years over the last 3 or 4 years on record. And so don't confuse weather with climate either. Local effects of climate change are weather for sure, but those are like symptoms. So as the climate warms, we may actually have more ferocious winters where I get a lot more snow and I get nasty temperatures and stuff. But that's because the energy crisis we're facing is that we're releasing long stored energy and carbon back into a system that is unstable by its nature, and it's chaos. Weather is it's a chaotic system. That's why they need to use supercomputers to model and predict. There's just too many variables and data points. You can't accurately model that. So there's that's why forecasting is not totally accurate either. I feel like we're already in an energy crisis, and this was sort of brought on because I read a a new post at climatenews.org, and there was a piece of research by the Northwest Territories Geological Survey where they found 52,000 square miles in the Northwest Territories that are affected pretty drastically by permafrost decay. So, I don't know. Does it seem like less of a crackpot theory now?
No, I never said it was a crackpot theory. The thing about that region, with the permafrost, it's an area that's been frozen since the last ice age. And, underneath all that ice, there was a lot of decaying organic matter, that was also frozen, and that's all carbon matter. And now that it's no longer sealed in by that ice, by that layer of ice, the decay has started again, which means that the carbon is, more carbon is getting released into the atmosphere. And the thing that we need to keep in mind is, we're not destroying the Earth. The Earth was here, has been here for 4.5 billion years. It'll probably be here for, between another 4 and 5 billion years until, the sun runs out of fuel and expands into a red giant, and swallows up the Earth.
There's a happy thought.
Yeah. But, I'm pretty sure that, that neither of us are going to be around at that point. And, the Earth will survive long after humans have gone extinct. Countless species have existed and gone into extinction, in the last 4 billion years. And countless more will do the same going forward. And humans will probably be one of them. But if we want to extend our time, before our probable extinction event, we need to be cognizant of what we're doing, and not take not take it for granted that our actions have no consequences. They do have consequences. And, while the Earth will go on, in some form, and it'll go through its own cycles, we need to do things, to minimize our own impact on it so that it remains habitable for our species at least for the foreseeable future.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of like before we wipe ourselves off the planet, save the planet really means just like save humanity.
Yeah.
The
planet, like I said, the planet will live until it's burned to cinders by the sun.
And even then it's just going to be a really hot rock.
Yeah.
And it's not just the Northwest Territories, like all across the Arctic, the same thing is going on with the permafrost thawing. And the Arctic Ocean,
is, it's warming at twice the rate of the rest of the oceans.
Yeah. And so what does that mean though? Everything's really interconnected. So what that means is like a couple of degrees here and there may not seem like a big deal, but you've got all these interconnected systems and that's a huge deal. And when we're thawing out, all of this decaying organic matter and we're releasing, silt and mud into streams that feed the ocean. Well, those streams and rivers, now you've put all that carbon in there. That means just less oxygen, which means that the vegetation dies because the light doesn't get through.
And the fish die. And all kinds of other.
Because they can't breathe. And then it hits the Pacific. And it's just, it creates this plume out into the ocean. So it doesn't take much. It seems like it's really robust. It's actually pretty fragile. But what's the most fragile is us. And so we're going to have to adapt to it one way or another. So, weather patterns change. We're going to get more intense storms. The untold effects, nobody can really predict, but most of the things I can imagine are bad. If we're going to do this, if we're going to make the jet stream shift around and get stronger and stuff, might as well put a bunch of wind turbines up there to capture the energy. If we're going to create deserts, let's put solar farms in them. I mean, come on. Something's going to need to run the desalination plants after we start purifying ocean water because we put too much shit in our groundwater. So that's my rant for now.
All right. Enough of that stuff for this week.
Thanks.
So last week we had a listener email that we put off from Ricardo asking us, he'd love to hear our thoughts on voice experience in the vehicle, from the embedded nuance systems to brought in stuff like Google Now and Siri. Things you hate about it, things you wish it would do, and things you think it should never do. Dan?
Some of the voice systems are really good, actually. And it's not even that they're the newest. I actually I like Nissan's system, and maybe it's because I'm so familiar with it. The Uconnect system we've got in the Jeep it's a little older now, and it's not that great. I think the biggest issue with all of them, and they're getting better at this, is they don't have casual language recognition. Some of them do, but that's a newer feature.
Getting there,
and yeah. Once that starts to roll out more, across the board, it'll be easier. But I think that's a user-based thing too. Once you start using the system and you learn the commands, it becomes easier to figure it out. Some of them I've really fought with. I just don't remember which. So I feel like I'm falling down on that point. But I have been impressed for several years by Nissan's system for sure. It just works.
Yeah, and the thing is, most of the embedded systems that you find in cars today are powered by Nuance. They use Nuance's technology, and the issue that we've had. The issue that we've had with voice recognition systems up until now is that cars tend to have very limited amount of processing capability for stuff like that in the vehicle. And in order to make the systems as reliable as they can, the engineers designing this stuff try to limit the vocabulary of words and commands that they can understand, so that if you get at least close to it, then it has a better chance of getting a correct recognition. So that's why you tend to have to remember very specific commands to do things, because the system has a limited vocabulary. And when you start getting into new language has all kinds of nuance, and there's so many different ways to say the same thing that to try to understand natural language is really hard. It takes a lot of memory and a lot of processing power, which is hard to do in the vehicle, and especially in the vehicle environment where you tend to have a lot of ambient noise and a lot of things going on around you. But what we're starting to see now is, the Ricardo mentioned, Google Now and Siri, both of which are cloud-based systems. When you say something to your phone, that the whatever you say gets recorded and uploaded to the cloud, and then masses of computers and data centers are the ones actually doing the processing and then figuring out what words you said, what they mean in context with each other, and trying to understand the meaning of the string of words that you said, and then executing something. What we're going to start seeing in the next year or so is hybrid systems coming into cars, because you can't always rely on that connectivity to the cloud. So these hybrid systems coming into the vehicles will have a cloud connection, because as more and more cars have standard telematics systems in there, they'll be able to either use that or use your phone to send the information to Nuance's cloud or somebody else's cloud, do that voice recognition, and then execute something. But then for those times when you don't have a reliable connection, there will still be a subset of that, that will be embedded in the car. And, as you've got more powerful processing available in the car on newer vehicles, it'll be able to do some of that, but not to the same degree that, the full connected system can do.
I'm sure too, some of it is just, yes, you can do it. You can even do it within the car. It's just the cost of the processors to do it too. Like, again, building a car is a very cost intensive thing, and there's not a ton of profit. So yeah, if you want to pay a bunch extra for it, I'm sure they could make it work better. The biggest issue I have with most of them is you can't always figure out how to get help. You can't just press the button and be like, help, and get the available commands are.
Right.
that would be fantastic. Then you'd be able to figure it out a lot quicker. Sometimes you hit help and it's like, do you want me to dial 911? And you're like, no, dialing 911. You're like, God damn it. So,
well, it's funny,
the systems that have better. Go ahead.
I think we got a little timing issue there with Skype tonight. I think one of the interesting things, bits of data that's come out of like some of the quality surveys, some of the initial quality surveys versus long-term quality surveys, is they found that owners, early on, in the first few months of owning a vehicle, tend to be much more frustrated with voice recognition systems and other technology. And what happens is when they do the longer term quality studies or durability studies, they don't mark the stuff down as much, because by that time they've either figured out the limitations and learned to and adapted to them, or else they've just given up on them entirely and they don't even care.
Yeah, we wind up not caring. Like with the Jeep, it can do more than we actually ask it. Just because, like, when a phone call comes in, it's like, phone call from blah 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 blah. Do you want to answer? It's like, can I please just answer the call? So it doesn't ring and then go to voicemail before I can answer it. So, yeah, they're figuring it out. It's getting better.
All right. Anything else for tonight, or are we done?
I think we're done, especially since we're suffering with some hotel internet speed issues. But this is episode 16. We'll be back for episode 17 next week. Thank you for the survey results. That was pretty interesting to read and to use to fine-tune the podcast so that it meets with more approval. So keep responses rolling in. Send us emails. Find us on Facebook and Twitter and wheelbearings.media. That'll open the world to everything. If you like the show, please tell all your friends, and maybe throw a review on iTunes or something. Even if you don't use iTunes, just go in there and give us a 5-star review, and hopefully more people will find us and listen to us. Yeah, I mean, I'd settle for a 4-star, because somebody wrote, one of the comments was, "Crazy Dan Roth makes me laugh." So I was like, all right. I'll take it.
Okay. All right. We'll talk to you all next week.
Owning a boat comes with a number of perks, like being able to say ahoy or land ho and not feel weird about it. So here's another perk. Geico's boat insurance offers access to the largest towing fleet on the water. And with specialist support from agents that are as passionate about boating as you are, there's so much value that you'll want to say, shiver me timbers, and not feel weird about that either. Get more with Geico.